And we're back. Max, what stood out to you at UFC 256 this weekend?
Man, the whole fucking card stood out. It was really great, but I had to cut a couple for the sake of time and brevity. But one I had to start talking about right off the bat was Chase Hooper versus Peter Barrett. Chase Hooper is, as far as I'm aware, the only fighter on the UFC roster who is younger than us. That's a bit of an oof for me. And he's an interesting guy because he's a really good grappler who's had a lot of success at the regional level. Just he's able to take it to the mat and find his way. And now at the UFC, the hole in his striking game has become very apparent in all three of his fights. First fight against David Tamur, an excellent kickboxer. Tamur hurt him pretty quickly, but Hooper just forced a grappling exchange and found a submission in it. His second fight was against Alex Caceres, a longtime veteran, also an excellent kickboxer. And Caceres just looked like a veteran, kept at striking kickboxing distance, and Hooper couldn't touch him. Easy point win for Caceres, and Barrett looked on pace to do that in this fight, except with more damage. He kept at kickboxing distance. He stayed calm in the forced grappling exchanges Hooper made. He didn't do anything reckless. He really hurt Hooper's leg with some nasty leg kicks. But then in the third round, Hooper had this beautiful transition. He feinted a strike, got Barrett backing up, reacting, watching the hands, and like rolled seamlessly into an Imanari. Got a hold on the leg and just stayed patient. He had about 3 or so minutes to work, I believe, at that point, and he just kept waiting. He kept adjusting, doing little things. It was in his world. He stayed calm, and he got the submission. It was an awesome comeback to watch. I don't know what's next for Hooper because he's got to fix his striking, and that doesn't happen overnight. So you want to see him keep taking fights and getting that experience and improving. But maybe they could give him a few guys who are good grapplers and strikers, not just like solid strikers, because he's having a bit of a rough run of it for now. But congrats to Hooper. It was awesome. This next fight, though, I'm even more hyped for. Gavin Tucker, the Canadian. I was excited to see what he could do. He was an underdog coming into this fight. Not a huge one, mind you, but the hype on Billy Quarantillo was real. And Gavin Tucker, I don't think he dissipated it because Quarantillo did everything he's supposed to do. He put an incredible pace on Tucker, but Gavin just showed great poise and looked like the better fighter everywhere it went. He had better striking. They called Quarantillo's clinch work better, but all he was landing was knees, whereas Tucker was also landing knees, landing elbows, landing punches to the body. The body work all night was beautiful, whether it was kicks, punches, or the knees I mentioned. He had a couple kicks to the head. His jab was on point. He managed to circle out. Every time it got near the clinch work, he managed to take the dominant position. He had beautiful trips to transition into half guard, side control. He didn't get a lot of damage off, but he was threatening with rear naked chokes and like seamless transitioning to back mount, made Quarantillo work, made the cardio guy tired, and just put damage on him the whole night. There was no finish, but I think he took it 30-27, and I think most guys are less durable than Billy Quarantillo, kind of less cardio, and almost anyone else in the division would have melted. Tucker also really excites me because he reminds me of the current champ, Alexander Volkanovski. They've got similar height, similar kind of stocky builds. They're both excellent kickboxers with great wrestling, and I think Tucker's jiu-jitsu is better than Volkanovski's. So he's 34 years old. That's the only downside to his game, but he only has 14 professional fights, so the mileage isn't too bad on him. I'm gonna actually message him and try and get him on because I think that would be awesome to start off with a Canadian. I was super impressed by Gavin Tucker. I can't wait to see what's next. I'm on the hype train. Attaboy, Governor. And man, the hype just kept on rolling. This next fight, Rafael Fiziev, sometimes referred to as the Matrix versus Renato Moicano, a former top 10 featherweight who moved up to lightweight and looks even better. But the matrix was real. He just came out of the gate, leg kicks, body kicks, trying to find his timing, really made Moicano focus on the kicks. And if someone's kicking you, one of the smartest things you can do is pressure through the kicks. And an excellent way to do that is with a jab, which was a counter adjustment Moicano made. But now Moicano was so worried about the kicks, I think he forgot the hands a little. Fiziev let out a beautiful three-piece combo, left hook to the body, right hand, and then another left hook just out of nowhere. That's like, he started with his hand down at the waist, picture perfect, just brought it up so quickly, landed flush on the chin. Now, the stoppage was tough because Moicano went down, Fiziev got on top of him, and the ref stopped it before anything else really happened. And I think it's because of how Moicano went down. He went down with his eyes rolling to the back of his head, but he recovered right away. As soon as Fiziev was on him, he got his legs up. The ref had already stopped it at this point, but Fiziev didn't land any ground and pound, so the ref didn't give Moicano a chance to intelligently defend himself. Now, after the ref pulled Fiziev off, Moicano tried to stand up and stumbled. He couldn't stand. So that says he was clearly hurt. But I think that happens a lot of the time. And that's the advantage of being on the ground. You don't have to have your wits about you. You can fight on instinct. You bring your legs, you tighten it, you make the guy unable to finish you, and then you get your wits about you in return. And that's kind of the standard for a finish. Chris Taoni has made a couple mistakes I've noticed this year. The most standout one, he thought a strike to the groin was a strike to the body and caused a fighter who was dominantly winning the fight to lose because of that misread. I don't know when athletic commissions start taking a look at that. Compared to that, this stoppage wasn't bad, but it was early for my taste, especially two top level guys. Moicano and Fiziev in any other division would both be ranked. Fiziev still probably has a win or two away from that. I don't think this decreases Moicano's stock at all, but stoppage aside, it was a beautiful finish. Can't wait to see what's next for Fiziev. Like I said, I don't know if he ends up ranked yet. I'd love to see him fight Arman Tsoukakian off the top of my head, but we'll see. And that brings us to the main card. So one thing I said about this card was that it was a lot of the old guard facing the new guard. And spoiler alert, in all three fights, the new guard came through and surpassed the old guard. First fight, Cyril Gane versus Junior Dos Santos, JDS. It's a lot more technical and patient by Gane than I thought in the first round. But he took his time. He was jabbing. He didn't land a lot, just a couple of kicks. But he made some reads, I think, because in the second round, he started landing a little harder. Hurt JDS with a jab. Got him backing up, confused. There was also some controversy over this because JDS was kind of against the fence. He turned off. The elbow landed right around here, thrown by Gane to drop JDS and stop the fight. And then JDS did this weird thing where, as they were waiting for the decision, he walked over to Gane and said, "Hey, that was an illegal elbow you got me with." And Gane's a good guy. He looked. I don't think he really knew what to do in that situation. But one, the elbow didn't look illegal by most standards. It landed on the ear. And two, JDS turned away from it, which is why it landed there and not, say, on the forehead. Just thought I'd mention that. So JDS now has lost 3 fights in a row. I forgot to mention his loss to Francis Ngannou last time. That was, I think, a minute in, he's lost 4 fights in a row now. There was Ngannou, then he lost to Curtis Blades, TKO second round. Then he lost to Jairzinho Rozenstruik, TKO second round. And now he's lost to Cyril Gane, TKO second round. I'm really high on Gane's hype train now. I love having technical strikers with power at heavyweight. I thought I'd talk a little about the landscape of the heavyweight division, and then I can circle back to JDS. So at the top, you have Stipe Miocic. his number one challenger, without a doubt, Francis Ngannou. That's the fight the UFC needs to make. I think both fighters have acknowledged it. I think the UFC has acknowledged it. I think and hope it's a matter of time. I've heard March tossed around a lot, but nothing official yet. So that's the fight to make. I mean, I'm so excited for that fight. The first one was one of my favorite performances of all time, but there's no question that's the fight to make. Then it's interesting because you almost have a number 2 contender spot with Curtis Blades, who's lost twice to Francis Ngannou throughout his career, but looked absolutely dominant over everyone else. Some of the guys below him included Alistair Overeem, Junior Dos Santos, Alexander Volkov. So then he's fighting Derek Lewis. That was rebooked, I think, for sometime in January. And that's going to be like for the number 2 contender spot. Now, here's where it gets a little less clear. You've got Jairzinho Rozenstruik, who just finished Junior Dos Santos. He's kind of floating at the number 3 spot. But then you've also got Alistair Overeem, who's going to be fighting Alexander Volkov. So they're right there. And now you've got Cyril Gane, who just won. So Rozenstruik has a win over Overeem, which was a very strange one where Overeem was winning on points and Rozenstruik took it with like 5 seconds left, knockout, except it was a strange finish. So you can almost put an asterisk on it, even though I do kind of think the finish was justified, but it's not totally clear who's better than the other. So because the championship belt won't be fought for a while, I'd like to see the winner of Curtis Blades, Derek Lewis, the number 2 spot, defend that spot to earn the next shot. I don't know if you do that against Jairzinho Rozenstruik, Cyril Gane, or Overeem Volkov, whoever wins that. I think those 3 parties kind of have to fight it out. So maybe you make Gane versus Rozenstruik. You have the winner of that fight the winner of Overeem Volkov, and then the winner of that can fight the winner of Lewis Blades, and the winner of that can fight whoever emerges between Stipe Miocic and Francis Ngannou. But John Jones is also floating around there, and you don't really know when he's going to pop in. So the top 5, top 6 of heavyweight is very interesting. I'll end just saying I don't really think JDS is over the corner. I think he coming into that 0-4 stretch, he stopped 2 top highly touted contenders in Derek Lewis and Tai Tuivasa. He's probably not washed up, and he probably still presents a lot of problems for the top 15 of the division. It's just going to be a question of the UFC wanting to pay him to continue to do so. So we'll see what happens there. Speaking of guys who aren't quite over the hill but got outmatched, we had Jacare Souza losing to Kevin Holland in one of the most interesting finishes I've ever seen in my life. I believe Jacare is Portuguese for alligator. I hope I'm not getting that wrong. Maybe crocodile. Either way, he is known as that because of his vicious jiu-jitsu game, his ability to roll and snap limbs. So almost no one wants to go to the ground with this guy. Kevin Holland went to the ground, was off his back, wriggled out into a bit more space than just having himself sat on. And I don't quite know how to explain this, but Holland was almost postured like in a prayer-like position where his knees were a bit folded under him. I don't know if you might have seen this highlight. Holland leaned back, used his leg to create whipping action, and just like turned into a right hand onto Jacare, like off his back, kind of stunned him for a sec. And Holland just scrambled to his feet, kept landing punches, and like 3 or 4 more punches put Jacare out. It was crazy just to see him. He's got really long arms, I think 81-inch reach, but he used his leg to just generate force. It wouldn't work without those crazy long arms, but it was ridiculous. Did you see it? Or
No.
Okay, I'm kind of surprised. I thought that would be a highlight. So Kevin Holland is now 5-0 in 2020. Gotta He's gotta be on the radar of in the fighter of the year list, especially with a win over Jacare. We didn't get to see much of Jacare's game, but I have no reason to think he's washed up or any worse than he was 2 years ago, stopping Chris Weidman and Derek Brunson. So credit to Kevin Holland. He's loudly making his name into the conversation. Looking forward to what's next for him, although I don't want it to be Khamzat Chimaev like he called out. I don't think he even wants it to be. He's just game for anyone. Next fight was Mackenzie Dern versus, I forget her first name, but I know now you pronounce it, Jandiroba. Two Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts, and unfortunately, as is often the case in mixed martial art bouts, the two grapplers had a stand-up fight. Dern, being the younger, more athletic, more explosive, you kind of have to favor her in that, and that's more or less what happened. It wasn't She had a nice jab, but her power hand was not pretty. She threw one leg kick that landed well, and then despite Jason Perillo, an excellent striking coach, telling her to use it, I didn't see her throw another one in the fight. But the fight got interesting because Jandiroba was throwing a kick to the head. Dern was closing distance, and the knee kind of caught her in the face and really fucked up her nose. So that was enough to kind of get Jandiroba the second round, which meant it was tied going into the third round. Bit of a brawly war. Again, I think Dern's youth and athleticism and size just favor her so much when you have two girls who can't really strike trying to strike, that it was a bit of a foregone conclusion. So I'm disappointed I didn't get to see any or much high-level scrambling, but Dern got it done. Hopefully she learned something and is a better striker going into it next. I'd love to see her fight Angela Hill. I think that'd be a really interesting matchup. Hill's a striker who has struggled with grapplers, so one or the other would have to take their game to the next level to move forward. That's, I think, the matchup to make, but we'll see what the UFC does. And that brings me to the co-main event, which was the fight I was most excited for on this card, Charles Oliveira versus Tony Ferguson. I've already spoiled it. The new guard passed the old in 3 out of 3 of those matchups, and Charles Oliveira did it beautifully. The thing about Tony Ferguson's game is he just drags it into a dogfight, a war, a high pressure. He makes you bend and then he makes you break because he is unbreakable no matter how much he bends. Oh, I didn't mean to set up that pun the way I did. But what won Charles Oliveira the fight was, after a dominant first round, an armbar. He stayed in mount after a beautiful takedown, after some nice striking, stayed in mount, landed top pressure, landed a couple strikes. Ferguson played cautiously, so Oliveira played cautiously, but showed great full mount pressure. And then looked up at the clock, real experience thing, nothing really to lose, so he looked for an armbar. And I think against 9.5 guys out of 10, he gets that armbar because he had it set up perfectly. He cranked it. Ferguson wasn't tapping, so he readjusted, tucked it under his armpit, cranked it more. You could see the hyperextension in the replay. I'm sure 1 or 2 seconds more and Ferguson maybe taps, but the round ended. But that ruined Ferguson's arm. I didn't see him throw a strike with it once. There wasn't a lot he could do on the feet or on the ground with the remaining 2 rounds. And Oliveira just looked dominant. He showed beautiful scrambling with Ferguson, because when Ferguson was off his back was probably the one time the arm didn't come into play as much. There was one in the third round where he got attacked, swept, turned it into a triangle, and just got right back into top control. His striking looked good. And again, you can't say Tony Ferguson. You don't know how washed Tony Ferguson is, because he is 37 years old. He does have a lot of mileage, and he's been injured a lot. That leg injury that he had the fourth fucking time the Khabib fight fell off. So you don't really know where Ferguson is at until you see him get another win, or at least look at his usual best, because he hasn't in his last two losses. But Oliveira had it all. He had striking. He had, what surprised me most was his wrestling game. He showed amazing takedowns, and maybe it surprised Tony Ferguson too, because he did not really put up any resistance on any of the takedowns. He really got all the way under Ferguson, lifted him up, and slammed him. Ferguson's a guy who used to fight at welterweight. Oliveira's a guy who used to fight at featherweight. So that tells me Oliveira's taking lightweight obviously real seriously. He's filled out his frame. He's got some muscle. A win, even Justin Gaethje's win over Ferguson, Gaethje got hurt by an uppercut by Ferguson in the second round. This was flawless by Oliveira. He was almost never in danger, never in serious danger, never hurt. So, I mean, like I said, I think 9.5 guys out of 10 tapped that armbar he had Ferguson with in the first round. I think you've got to give Oliveira the winner of Conor Poirier and make it for the title. I don't know where Justin Gaethje fits in there. I wouldn't be against finding a way to toss him into the mix, because I'll talk about this in another time, but I think the lightweight division is just so stacked. There's some benefit and appeal to drawing out the awarding of the title over a year. But Charles Oliveira's got to have his name is, to me, number 2 behind Dustin Poirier right now. And I'm so impressed. I was talking about Chase Hooper at the beginning, saying we'll see what experience does and how it rounds out his game, because Charles Oliveira has set the standard of what just so much time and experience in the UFC can do to your game, and what that looks like then at the peak. I can't wait to see what's next for Oliveira. The one other thing I'd be criminal if I didn't say is, I say this as someone who was always a Khabib fan and always thought he would beat Tony Ferguson, but this fight left no doubt in my mind. We saw Ferguson go against one great grappler before in Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee was able to get Ferguson to the ground. He was able to get him in mount, and then he gassed and Ferguson took it by triangle. Khabib doesn't gas. Khabib doesn't make silly mistakes that let him end up in triangle. So that was enough for me. But watching Oliveira take Ferguson down with ease, there's no doubt in my mind that Khabib would have done the same. Watching Oliveira not even really get close to getting submitted, there's no doubt in my mind Khabib would have done the same. Watching Oliveira get to full mount side control so many times, there's no doubt in my mind Khabib would have put a vicious ground and pounding on Ferguson and probably hurt him more than Gaethje did. So I think a lot of fans feel that way. There's some people who are going to say the Ferguson of today, even against Cowboy and Pettis, isn't the prime Ferguson. But I think the Ferguson that walked in the cage against Kevin Lee, Rafael dos Anjos, and Edson Barboza still would have lost. All right. That brings us to the main event, which did not disappoint. Deiveson Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno, both coming off their last performance wins 3 weeks ago. First round stoppages for each. The question I had in this fight was, what would Figueiredo look like in the later rounds, because he throws with so much damage and fights so hard. And luckily, Brandon Moreno was durable enough to provide an answer. It was a really interesting fight. Figueiredo, his cardio held up about as poorly as I expected, but it would have, there's 2 asterisks on that. I'll say the first one now. The asterisk being Figueiredo did everything and more you could ask for from a guy who's not going to ever have the cardio to go 5 hard rounds. He stayed patient. He walked forward. He picked his shots. I think he had 60% accuracy at one point. So he was throwing wild, but he wasn't throwing too much wild. He kept enough in the tank to not totally gas out the way you saw Conor do against Nate in the second round in their first fight. So he landed a lot of shots that probably put a lot of guys at flyweight out. but not Brandon Moreno. And I thought Figgy won the first 2 rounds, and then it got interesting in the third round because Figueiredo landed a brutal front kick to the groin of Moreno, and the ref took a point, which you almost never see the ref take a point without a warning. It's worth noting that Figueiredo had an eye poke earlier, so I don't know if that influenced the point deduction. But the second round was close, and I thought Moreno absolutely won the third round. Then he definitely won the fourth round. Figueiredo was clearly waning, and he looked kind of like an arrow at the end of his flight to me. And he maintained that in the fifth round, but something happened with Moreno's shoulder. He barely threw in that round. So you had a guy who was very tired and hurt versus a guy who was also very hurt and I assume quite tired, just not the same way, with a shoulder injury. So you had a pretty lackluster fifth round, which after 4 rounds of craziness, I don't think I said that yet, but it was an absolute war. So the judging decision ended up being a majority draw, which is what I had scored: round 1-2 Figueiredo, round 3-4 Moreno with the point deduction, and then round 5 Figueiredo. One judge gave the win to Figueiredo. I don't know how you give the third round to him, but judging mixed martial arts. Now, the other asterisk on Figueiredo's cardio is that he apparently had a stomach infection and diarrhea at like 3 a.m. the morning before the fight. There's no way that doesn't take some toll, but it was an awesome fight. Some people were saying fight of the year. I don't think so. I've still got Dan Hooker versus Dustin Poirier and Weili Zhang versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk higher. I think those were more intense, more back and forth, more interesting, but this would be third for me in that list. I think we get an instant rematch when you have a draw because Figueiredo retains his title, but he didn't beat Moreno. He was crying after the decision, so I think he let himself down as well. And in such circumstances, you ask, all right, who's going to circle back, make the right reads, make the right adjustments, and improve themselves? And that's what the instant rematch lets us watch to see. So saying hopefully sounds off to me because it's almost a certainty. I think that's good for the flyweight division. I'm excited to see the rematch. It was an awesome fight. I'm less high on it than a lot of people seem to be. I thought Figueiredo's cardio was an easy hold a spot in his game. He lost the fourth round. I think against any uninjured fighter, he would have lost the fifth round and lost the fight. He landed eye pokes. He landed the groin strike. In his anti-grappling, he kept doing this thing where he really put the hand on the face and just pushed away. And a lot of fighters do that, but I've never seen any do it in a way that seems to get so close to an eye poke as much as Figueiredo. So my questions from last fight about the fence grabbing are still there. I'd love to see him get a couple wins where I just don't have to ask those questions because, like I said, when I was talking about that, it's about the pattern. What are you seeing every time? And I continued to see some fouls. So we'll see. And that about wraps up my UFC recap. We'll be right back talking some basketball.